Hi, welcome to Navel Gazing on valleyindy.org and 103.5 WNHH, New Haven's community radio station. Today's episode is brought to you by Valley Gives Back, a new initiative of the Valley Community Foundation. Adding a charity to your estate plan creates a legacy that tells future generations what causes matter to you during your life. Your action inspires others to follow your lead and to make a difference. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact your community forever without affecting your current lifestyle. For more information, visit valleygivesback.org. The Valley Gives Back is an initiative of the Valley Community Foundation, connecting private philanthropy to the long-term public good of the Valley. Plan now, give later, impact tomorrow. valleygivesback.org.
Hundreds of years we've brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs of inbreeding, TV sucking ideas from our head, public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaur, yeah, ride the dinosaur. Our readers are in the...
Hey, it's Eugene again from valleyindy.org. Welcome officially to the latest episode of Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy Podcast. Today's discussion is a bit freewheeling. The guests are Rick Dunne, the executive director of the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. That's like a regional planning agency. They do a lot of stuff. They're involved in everything in the valley, and especially in terms of whenever you read about contaminated sites that are getting cleaned up, brownfields, Ansonia's redevelopment efforts, Derby's downtown redevelopment efforts, everything from, where the police department's supposed to go in Ansonia on 65 Main Street to the new Bad Sons Brewery. Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments has had a hand in it all. And we're going to talk transportation with Rick Dunne, and also joining Rick on the phone is Jim Gildea, who is now the chairman of the Derby School Board, something that actually happened after this podcast was taped last week. But Jim is very heavily involved in rail transportation, the Waterbury line specifically here in the Naugatuck Valley. He's on the Commuter Rail Council. Anyway, I give you all his titles once the podcast gets going. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now and enjoy the show. Oh, we're selling Valley Indy t-shirts, by the way. Look on our Facebook page or valleyindy.org. We're looking to sell a total of 50, and we're about halfway there. It's a fundraiser, and we want to get our name out there a little bit. Why not? Thanks. All right, so on the line with us on Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy Podcast, we have Jim Gildea, who was recently reappointed to the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council by Governor Malloy, and he's been asked to, or at this point might be an official member of Senator Chris Murphy's Transportation Advisory Council. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And then in the studio, joining me live on the podcast is Rick Dunne, the executive director of the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments.
Good afternoon.
I'm just so happy I got those organizations and the titles correct, because I never do that. So I thought today we would have a discussion in general about what's happening with transportation issues, of which there are many in the Naugatuck Valley and beyond, because this is really a regional, statewide, tri-state area issue. And I thought maybe first, Rick, we would touch upon these charrettes, which is like a new government word that I've learned in the last couple of years.
It's not a government word. No. Architects use that word.
People smart with higher degrees, advanced degrees than I.
That's right.
Use these phrases. And there's been a series of charrettes that your organization, the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, has sponsored. You had one in Derby right after the election. You had one in Seymour, and I'm looking at this list, and hopefully this is up to date. You had one in Naugatuck on the 27th. And then Tuesday, December 5th, you have one coming up in Ansonia.
Correct.
And that's going to be at Main Street, 253 Main Street at Ansonia City Hall. And then the final one is Wednesday, December 13th in Shelton City Hall, 54 Hill Street. And again, that is the city of Shelton, and it's called the Route 8 Study TOD Workshops/charrettes. Sure. Each one's taking place from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So if you could, I know these topics are large and a little bit unwieldy for people that aren't involved in it every day like myself, but basically what is happening in each one of these public forums that you're planning, Rick?
So let me try and put it in context. We're conducting a corridor study of the entire Waterbury branch line and Route 8 corridor. The charrettes are a piece of that, and they're designed to help communities determine their planning around station areas.
And I'll just rudely interrupt.
Sure.
You can hear the train coming in the background. We're right across from the Ansonia train station.
Yes, we are.
I planned that. High production values here at this nonprofit.
Excellent.
All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's good.
Go ahead.
That's good. But what it does is the charrettes are intended to help the communities design their goals for planning and development around the train station areas. As Jim knows, he's a leader and I would say the lead advocate on the Waterbury branch line improvements, which are underway. But for additional locomotives and some train sets, we are at a point where we can have a much higher level of service on that line. My agency study is looking at what those service levels could be. And then we're also looking at where traffic diverts currently from Route 8 over the Commodore Hull Bridge into Shelton. We have so many cars that go in that direction.
That's the worst traffic hub in the valley.
That's right. And well, in many parts of Connecticut, I mean, it's in the top 3 or 5 toughest places to travel in Connecticut on the roadways. And there is no effective public transportation to get into those areas. So we're going to look at an alternative mode. That's why one of the charrettes, the one in Shelton, even though it's held at City Hall, the Derby-Shelton charrette was held in Derby at the Derby-Shelton Rail Station. The Shelton charrette is really for Bridgeport Avenue. How are we going to connect from the Derby-Shelton Rail Station over to downtown Shelton and then down to the corporate parks in Shelton and then in Trumbull? So we're looking at something like a CT Fast Track type service, which has proven very effective, very efficient, and very popular.
Except not with Dominic Thomas. He is the prominent not Derby, well, he's based in Derby, a land use attorney in the Valley, and every time he
speaks, when he's not here, he has to be here, right?
Well, every time he speaks, somebody brings up transit-oriented development, and they're always bringing up the fast track on the other side of the state, which forever angers Dominic Thomas. And he makes a point because it does feel, and you'll probably both take issue with this, but like in terms of transportation, sometimes it feels like the Valley is overlooked, where we get press releases every day for all these wonderful things happening in New Britain and Hartford and places like that. But you're saying the work is starting, the planning at least is starting to happen here in the Valley. So
without getting too far afield and too arcane, I largely blame that on the fact that our region was much too small. People don't understand. Transportation dollars are appropriated through the regions and what are called metropolitan planning organizations, which we also are. When we were just Valley, 4 towns, we didn't have control of the corridor to plan the corridor. We had partners based in Waterbury who had that piece of the corridor. We had partners in Bridgeport who had the Trumbull to Bridgeport piece of the Route 8 corridor. There was no comprehensive planning going on. So Capital Region, they started a major infrastructure study for Fast Track 20 years ago. That's why they got it. They control the whole area.
Oh, gotcha.
So you have to look at how the state only can implement what we give them. In large part. So that's really been a key. I think now that we are a 19-town region that covers most of the Route 8 corridor, we're able to exert a lot more influence in the planning for these types of things. But so it's a larger survey. It's a larger study. We have, I've got some data and some counts that I think are interesting. But really, I would turn to Jim and try and talk a little bit about the importance of transit, because the key is not to expand the highways. That's the least efficient way to do this. Highways are not a scalable transportation option, but trains and buses are scalable. And BRT is a really flexible and fast service. We're trying to create a 20-minute commute from the Derby Shelton station to Bridgeport station by way of Bridgeport Avenue. So
you want to throw it to Jim for a second? Let's
sure.
talk about...
Jimmy's been listening to me yak on, so
for like decades.
I would certainly weigh in and say that the neat thing about the charrettes is nothing spurs action, whether it be legislative action or bureaucratic action, more than grassroots attention in attacking into the grassroots. And I would say that we're seeing some great things on the Waterbury branch headed in the future. But that really all came about through grassroots, through forums, through getting people together. And I remember Rick and I really early on being pioneers, in 2013 and bemoaning the status of the Waterbury branch. And he and I sat down and we talked about some of the goals. And it's just about getting people together, and it's reaching out to the potential users and the people who are interested in it.
Yeah, and Jim, I had mentioned this Senator Murphy's Transportation Advisory Council. Is that officially a thing now, of which you remember?
It is officially a thing that that they are putting the council together. They are getting organized, and so yes, we have not had the first date. They told us they would let us know that, but I think it's pretty close.
So, and just jumping off your point where you said,
Sure.
This is grassroots organized. I mean, just since we launched in 2009, the fact that you have a U.S. Senator now taking an issue or making this an issue as part of his job, what do you think that will do, or what are your hopes, and what is this advisory council going to do, you think?
Well, Senator Murphy certainly has been a huge advocate in his office for the Waterbury branch line, and I would say that having his involvement and participation has already reaped benefits. A few years back, we lost the express train to Stamford, and I really do believe that the only reason we got that back was because Senator Murphy got involved, and he called for a meeting with the Department of Transportation and Metro North, and I think we got that pretty quick. So having a United States Senator and having his office as engaged as they are certainly has already proven to be beneficial for the branch.
And then in terms of the improvements, I think my landlord might have just showed up and he's going to throw us out if anybody hears those noises in the background. But in terms of the Waterbury branch line, which is it seems so critically important to the development of our downtowns and so even in Seymour, Ansonia, Derby, of course, and Shelton, where they're just building more and more apartments, condos, townhouses right on the rail line. You review, because we haven't had you on this podcast in a long time. What is the latest? How is the work going on the Waterbury branch line? What's getting done? And then I want you to talk about what are your goals for your group in 2018.
The improvements coming to the Waterbury branch, I would say, really are threefold. First, they are in process of installing a cab system, and they're coupling that with a PTC, positive train control system. And those are two really different, succinct things. The cab system will be able to control following trains, and that is the system that will work with the passing sidings and allow two trains to come down our single track. And part of that calls for 4 passing sidings, 1 in Milford, 1 in Beacon Falls, 1 in Waterbury, and 1 in Derby. The Derby siding is complete, although not active. In the spring, we expect them to start work on the Beacon Falls siding. Separate to that is positive train control, whereas the cab system just controls a following train. Positive train control really takes into account track speed, misaligned switches, curves in the track, and it slows the train from a safety perspective based upon that. And then I think Rick referenced it as well. The third component, I would say, is the replacement of the cabs and the coaches and the locomotives, which we just talked to the Department of Transportation yesterday, and they're still on track to move ahead with that order out of the original Let's Go Connecticut money. So those are the three, what I would say, main prongs of the improvement in the Waterbury branch. And if I could just say one last thing to that. So now the key for us will really be ensuring, and Rick touched upon this very well, this will now allow for significant increases in service. So the next step for us is great. The state's invested the $70 million to do all this. Certainly we don't want that to be a waste of an investment. We really want to push to make sure that additional service comes with it.
And what's the status of that? Do we know when we'll start seeing the benefit of these improvements to the line?
The PTC and the cab control system are expected to be completed December 2020. So we're still, still a few years away. But all you have to do is go down there by Monroe Muffler and Brake and Derby, and you see the siding. You see that additional siding. Next year you'll be able to see the siding, in Beacon Falls. So the work is going, and 3 years may seem far away, but I think it'll be here before you know it.
One of my favorite things about Jim Gildea is that you go to his Twitter feed, or I assume you're the Waterbury line, right? That's your...
Yes, sir. Yes, I am.
Jim. And like Jim's probably he's the only guy I know that'll go down there. He's taking pictures of the siding. It's cool to see because it makes it accessible. Because I drive over that all the time. I never knew what it was. Right. So that's pretty cool. What about now? A couple of years back, there was, I think, somebody at one of the forums that you had helped to organize called the Waterbury Branch an outhouse on wheels, which was of course just a gift to journalists and headline writers. That was a way to engage people in this story. In terms of kind of the physical appearance and your relations with the MTA in terms of breakdowns and the things that drive commuters nuts, how are you doing with those issues?
I do feel, and again, I just want to reference the forums too. I would be remiss if I didn't say I've always felt that Rick and I we partnered on this, and he's always been it's kind of neat to have a fellow Derbyite, and we've always kind of partnered on this, and so I've always appreciated his role as well. But I do actually think that our relationship with the MTA and the Department of Transportation has improved. Mm-hmm. I've been chairman of the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council for the last few years, and I do find them more responsive. They did assign a Waterbury branch advocate to the branch. I do feel that if there's issues, I'm a phone call from being able to get in touch with the right person, and we try to work through those. And I would want to mention, and this is really neat, and people, because for years, the outhouse on wheels and the bus substitutions, this year to date, and this is really neat, the Waterbury branch line has the best on-time percentage out of all the lines on the New Haven line. It has a better on-time percentage than the New Haven line, than the Danbury branch line, than the New Canaan line. And so they've really kind of turned a corner with the service. And certainly from day to day, you're going to hear there's a bus substitution. But overall, their on-time percentage is pretty strong, and we have the best OTP on the on the line right now.
And then how about in terms of ridership? I know it kind of goes up and down all the time, but how are you seeing more people riding the trains now? It seems like we're coming out of the recession a little bit, and I guess Rick, you have information too on that?
I'll jump in, and I apologize to Jim. I don't think we've published these numbers. We might have shared them with some people. We haven't published the
an exclusive results. 17 minutes in. Here we go.
Yeah, right. Burying the lead. Our agency, my staff conducted onboard surveys of Waterbury branch line trains in late September and early October. They were out there for 4 days. So we did a total passenger count on an average daily basis. What was interesting is one of the things that people repeat constantly is, well, there's only 300 riders a day on the Waterbury branch line. I have state officials tell me that. And
who?
I won't say.
Right,
I won't say.
I won't press you.
But there, the state's own counts from 2015 are I think 867, and in 2016 761 is an average daily. We went out and we found over 1,000 daily riders on the Waterbury branch line. About a little more than 500 inbound, a little more than 500 outbound. It's a pretty consistent number. Interesting stats on it. 45% of the riders don't transfer to a New Haven main line. Obviously, 54% do, 54.5% transfer to New Haven main line. 87% of those people transfer again at Bridgeport. 6% are transferring at Stamford, and some at Stratford because of the way the trains are routed and scheduled. So what we found out is people on the Waterbury branch line, 29% of them, their final destination is Grand Central Station, which we thought was a surprisingly high number. 19% are going to Stamford, and then only 2.5% obviously are going east to New Haven, because you have to go to Bridgeport
to get there.
It's a very, very long trip. It's actually quicker from Waterbury to New Haven to take the bus, the CT Transit bus, than it is to try and schedule things to get to New Haven from the Waterbury branch line.
And then just randomly, the 29% of riders that are making their way to Grand Central Station each day. Do we have any idea, like what they do for a living down there? What types of?
No, we didn't go into that
Gotcha.
level of detail on the survey, but it's not just the 29.5% to Grand Central. Another 9% are going to 125th Street, getting off at 125th Street. So. And from there, they're probably getting on public transit. They're probably getting a subway down the east side. So it was really interesting to find out that more than half the people on the train are using it for work, commuting. 78% of them use the train in both directions each day, which was also a surprising number. And over 42%, 5 times a week or more, are on the train. 2 to 4 times a week was 28%. So I mean they're very, very strong numbers. I think it shows the demand is there. We see the ridership rise when gas prices rise. It seems more worthwhile, I think, to some people to give up their car. And that's really the struggle with this. That's really the overall reason why we're doing this. I said earlier, you can't scale highways. It's not a scalable system. So we have such bad performance at the Commodore Hall Bridge. I probably don't have to go through it for anyone who's actually listening to this podcast, but in the PM, northbound on Route 8 between exits 12 and exits 20, the average speed is 25 miles per hour. Wow. In the morning peak between 20 and 12, it's 32 miles per hour. We have 740 accidents every year between the Stratford-Shelton Town Line and the Waterbury-Watertown Town Line on Route 8. The accident rate is about 87 accidents per mile, but it exceeds 300 accidents per mile along 3 sections. Exit 15, which is Route 34, exit 27, which is up in Naugatuck, and exit 31 and 32 in Waterbury. Most of the accidents are property damage, but in this period measured, and these numbers are from 2011 to 2013.
I'm actually surprised that exit 13 doesn't, because we just all day long when we the evening commute listening to the scanner, they're constantly being sent to 13, 11.
So a lot of 13 and 14s get counted at 15.
Oh, okay.
Because it's one section coming through when you make that bend. In Shelton, and it narrows down and it goes under the city cross streets through the underpasses, and it really necks down before you get to the Commodore Hall Bridge. So you get a lot of accidents in there, but they tend to get reported at 15. It's wherever the cars pull over. It's wherever the police respond to.
Where they where they pull up to. Right. Oh, fascinating.
So we suspect that a lot of those are exit 13. Or interchange 14 technically.
And the basic problem with the bridge is that it wasn't designed to hold that many cars. And
well, we have greater than 80,000 average daily just on the bridge itself. The interchanges between 34, 8, and 110, that number's over 130,000 cars a day. That's larger than many interchanges on I-95. So it's very dense. The level of service in the vicinity of Commodore Hall Bridge is F. I mean, they're failing. Everything fails. Every modeling and testing in that area. And this is really the key issue for taxpayers. And this is an economic development issue, and this is a cost issue. We're going to spend at some point in the future of Connecticut, we're going to have to expand the Commodore Hall Bridge just for capacity. if we want to continue to rely on motor vehicles to get all of these people to jobs in Shelton, in Trumbull, and down the line, or to stations on the main line if we don't provide proper rail service on the branch line. Because those people drive. We track people who drive from Cheshire to Bridgeport and Fairfield to Park and get on the train.
Wow.
So they're in their car, they're on Route 8, they're through that traffic jam, and then they're getting on the train to go to New York. It's an insanity. So we need to get the cars off. If we have to replace Commodore Hall Bridge for capacity or widen that area, if that's the solution that people want, you're going to spend like $500 million minimum. You'll probably be at $1 billion by the time you finish that project. We could implement everything that we need on the Waterbury branch line for less than $500 million. We could probably install BRT service as well on the Route 8 corridor.
And BRT service
is bus rapid transit. That's like CT Fast Track.
Okay, gotcha.
And for people who aren't familiar with that, they really should ride it. Just go up on a weekend to New Britain, get on it, take the express into Hartford, just for the experience of it. It's nicer than a bus or a train. It's got Wi-Fi, you can get work done, but the key is in the Route 8 corridor between Derby, Shelton, and Bridgeport, it's an extraordinarily wide expressway, and the right-of-way is even wider than that. We can get exclusive bus lanes on that right-of-way and go out, make a stop on Bridgeport Avenue, Research Drive, that area, Trap Falls, back down into the Trumbull Business Park. And then, make a 20-minute connection would be our goal, something in that range between Derby Shelton Station and one of the stations in Bridgeport, whether it's the new one or the existing one. And by creating that, we now have a scalable system that people should want to ride, that'll be convenient and will be able to get them to their jobs. We've got like 30,000 people a day inbound to Shelton, and we've got to figure out how to get them there some other way than everyone driving their own car.
There's some angry drivers commuting to Shelton. I'm going to tell you right now.
Yeah,
right
well,
I pick up my
everywhere.
kids in Bridgeport at school. Come home on.
Yep.
I blame specifically the people that are going to Bob Cinto Towers. I'll put that out there right now.
Well, I don't know exactly where they're all going, but we know where the destinations are, and we know where the load is. Most of those people that you see in the afternoon, they work in Fairfield County or further down the line, and they're coming home to houses that they purchased in up and down the Naugatuck Valley. When you think about what our problem is, it's kind of I won't say uniquely, but it's a very American problem. It's kind of the use of the motor vehicle has been the democratization of luxury and speed and convenience, and at the cost of our economy. It worked for a while. It worked when suburban office parks were the model and towns kept expanding and developing. But the costs associated with running all these suburban towns, and great, you get a business, they go out in the woods and they build a big office park, and they put in the infrastructure. But then the taxpayers own that infrastructure, and they have to maintain it, and they have to keep it up. Now we're at the point where younger people don't want to live in these areas. They want to live in areas that are convenient, that they don't have to necessarily own a motor vehicle all the time. They can use Zip cars or rental cars or Uber when they need that. By bringing this type of a system into Connecticut, by expanding, I thought the governor's plan for the Metro North line he said his goal originally was so that no one needed a train schedule to take a train. You just show up, and within 10 minutes there'll be a train running on the main line in either direction. So that's really rapid transit. That's not really commuter rail, but that should be the goal, because until we have a system like that, 95 is going to be a mess. Route 8 is going to be a mess. 91 is going to be a mess. We need these systems for economic development, and the taxpayers, frankly, pay more. The biggest, this is the thing that Chambers of Commerce, I usually get booed.
No one gets booed. I just spoke at a Chamber of Commerce. If I don't get booed,
the thing is, I asked them all, what's the mode of transportation that gets the greatest subsidy? And people are always complaining. Bus riders only pay 25% of their cost of their ride, and rail riders only pay. What do you guys pay, Jimmy? 60% of your ride? 50%?
Were you asking me?
Yeah. Well, it's a fair.
Yeah, it's Waterbury Bridge. I think you're close, like 42%.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So and I'll have people complain. You're providing all this subsidy to those people. I don't get a subsidy. Well, the most subsidized mode of transportation are people who drive motor vehicles. They don't pay anywhere near 25% of the cost of maintaining a roadway system for them to drive on.
I know where you're going with this, Rick. We don't want to bring up your whole thing. You're driving, you pay tolls based on a tax on how much you pay or how much you drive, a tax based on how much you drive. But wait, let's throw it back to Jim for a second, because we're calling him on his lunch hour and he probably wants to eat. And Jim, if you have to jump off, feel free.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. And this is the stuff certainly that Rick's talking about is interesting and important to the region and the community.
Now, you're actually the guy, you use the train every single day, correct? So you're on that train?
I would say, yeah, 3 to 4 days a week, absolutely. There's a day or two here where I just, again, and this is what we talk about, there's a time or two that I just simply can't make the time work. And so when Rick talks about getting cars off of the Commuter Rail Bridge or getting cars off of Route 8, and we talk about ridership, it kind of all ties in together, is that with the current service as it exists, there are countless people who simply can't take the train because you either have to leave Bridgeport at 3:41, or you have to leave Bridgeport at 5:57, and that's your option. Period. And if you don't catch the 5:57, they think the next train is 8:39. And so that's really the issue. So many of the studies that the Department of Transportation conducted as they looked at the passing siding work is that they feel that they could double the amount of ridership that currently exists on the Waterbury branch, because then you would be able to pick those gaps up. So to your point, I take the train as much as I could, but even for me, there's a day or two that it's just hard to make it work.
And then, Rick, you had mentioned something interesting to me, just the concept of economic development. This is really an economic development issue as much as anything else. Sure. And then at the beginning of the podcast, you had talked about some of these charrettes you're having concentrate on the area around our train station. Yep. And when I look at around the Derby train station, it's sort of isolated. Right. There's the new transportation depot, I guess. Is that a correct word, that was just built?
Well, that's just a bus maintenance center. We'll be undertaking a study of the rail station, the historic rail station, Derby Shelton Station, after we move Valley Transit out of there and into their new building, or their renovated building.
And I guess where I was going to was that then we have there's the downtown redevelopment project in Derby. In the redevelopment zone there, which is right near the train station. And then we have the Route 34 widening project. The last, it was, of course, now we're having a change of administration in Derby. So what's the latest you've heard on the Route 34 widening project? Last we heard, the state is supposed to be tearing down those buildings on the south side of Main Street, like where Aloha Tile was, and the liquor store and the former religious store that moved to, I think, Orange. What's happening there?
Well, so we've really been at a standstill for a year, since last November, because of objections from the Downtown Now design team to the concept for the roadway.
And just for our listeners, Downtown Now was this a group put together by Mayor Delgado, got a grant to hire DPZ Partners, a planning firm, to put together this effort to talk about downtown redevelopment. So I probably shouldn't have even said that, because I've just muddied the waters more. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, so they objected to a design we were in final design on. So those issues were unresolved. They wanted to change major portions of it that would affect the performance of the roadway.
So that never, I know, because there was a letter sent to the state, and then there was another forum held where you discussed all these things. Right. So that's just that's.
Yeah, it's no surprise to anyone who's paid attention to this that I object strenuously to the recommendations of Downtown Now in regard to Route 34. So I look, the buildings have been acquired by the state. The only reason they haven't come down, is my understanding, is that the fire department had asked to use them for training before they were demolished after the hazardous materials were taken out, the asbestos, the lead, and so forth.
Although I had heard at one point, and then after that was pulled back.
I hear that's what I've heard in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That's no longer going to be the case. So the DOT is free to proceed with their demolition, I believe.
Are they waiting for because now the state DOT is also, I assume, reviewing these changes that came up a year ago out of the Downtown Now process? Where does that stand?
No, we're at a standstill until we agree on a path forward for the design with City of Derby. Now, obviously, my preference would be to revisit the whole issue and go back to the design we had a year ago. We were ready to go to final design and construction documents and construction, and proceed with that plan. But it's up to the City of Derby because that plan relies upon one-way circulation on Minerva
But
and
didn't
Elizabeth
Derby
Street.
say we want to tweak this plan? I thought that whole meeting was, all right, we're going to bring this up to the state and see what they have to say about it.
Yeah,
but it just never actually went that way. It was just a stalemate.
We had to take counts and model. And I don't want to get too technical. So the traffic that moves over the bridge from Shelton and down Route 34, which is less of a concern from Roosevelt Drive, whether creating a left-hand turn at Elizabeth Street, which we were eliminating under the plan, whether creating that turn would diminish the performance of the intersection at Bridge and 34, essentially backing up traffic. And, we decided to go out and do new traffic counts. So we didn't model it yet. We haven't modeled it yet. I'm looking forward to meeting with the new administration next week and having a discussion about this.
Yeah. Have you talked to Rich Zekin or Andrew Backlick or any of his?
Yeah.
I haven't checked. I mean, he's getting, as of this recording, Rich Zekin will be sworn in tomorrow. Saturday,
Sorry.
December 2nd.
And since the election, they've contacted us. They've reached out. Rich was the representative from Ansonia. He was the alternate representative from Ansonia, who was employed there to my agency. So he's familiar with our process. So I've met with Rich and parts of his team, and they plan to move quickly on this and try and get a project rolling so that we're all in agreement on what the design should be. I'm looking forward to that next week.
And have you heard anything about, just last week, the city of Derby received bond commission money, I want to say, or I'm not sure exactly what the source. It was state money for
$200,000.
Okay, for remediation.
Yeah. So actually, it's the grants come through my agency for brownfields. So we have $200,000 for Derby, $200,000 for Ansonia. And the Derby money is intended to do the environmental testing under the proposed. So out of the Downtown Now project, they proposed this U-shaped street grid to on the south side of Main Street to create the infrastructure necessary for development of buildings down there. So that plan, this money will do the underlying environmental assessments to determine what type of remediation may be required once those properties are acquired and in order to build the roadway and infrastructure on top of that.
Okay.
They have other decisions to make as to how they handle the south side of Main Street. But the planning and zoning has approved the U-shaped concept, and
we'll see with this new administration what happens with that plan, I assume.
Right, but it's the Board of Aldermen and the administration control development of the city. It's up to them. I mean, I'm not going to. I don't pretend to speak for either the old administration or the incoming administration. But the land owned by the city of Derby, which most of that land now is owned by the city of Derby, is under the control of the Board of Aldermen. That's by charter.
So it's going to be an interesting year moving forward in Derby. And then Jim Gildea, just putting on your other hat as a member of the Derby Board of Education for a long time now. How many years have you been on the Board of Ed?
This will be, I'm about to enter my 21st, I think, and 22nd year out of the last 28. I mean, some kind of crazy amount.
Yeah, that is incredible. Because those are the meetings. Planning and zoning can be long sometimes, but Board of Ed anywhere. That's a commitment right there.
Well, Gene, as you know, I have 7 kids, and I space those out pretty good. So, this is one way to give back for certain.
Yeah, absolutely. But one thing that came out of this election November 6th, which I didn't even notice that night, to be honest with you, because the Derby Board of Education is not a political body from what I've experienced. You can't tell who's a Democrat and who's a Republican really on that board. But there was a Republican majority now on the Derby Board of Education. What can you talk about the composition of the board now and what you think the goals will be in Derby in terms of education for the next year or so? What challenges does the school district face?
I think, well, first and foremost, I think you hit the nail on the head. I've served on many boards and commissions, and truly I've been fortunate that very few of the boards or commissions I've been on have been political. So I do think that our board, the previous board, and certainly the incoming board, will always focus on what's in the best interest of the children, and we continue to do that. Moving ahead, I would tell you certainly some of the concerns is from a budgetary perspective. I think we're getting to a point where some of the grants that we've been lucky to get, our Alliance and Priority School District grants, we start to get worried when you see the economic climate that the state is in. You start to get worried that the grants will continue to be there. And quite frankly, one of the biggest differences this go-round versus my first 14 years on the board was that we've had those grants for the last 4 years, and they're significant grants. They're millions of dollars, and quite frankly, in many cases, they've carried us. So on the horizon, I think we really have to, from a budgetary perspective, start to plan as if how we would live in a world without those grants, because it is concerning to know that they're not always going to be there.
And we just covered, or Ethan Fry covered last night, the inauguration of Ansonia Mayor David Cassetti for a third term in the city next to Derby. And one of the things that the mayor seemed to bring out, at least according to Ethan's story, was this concept of regionalization. And it was a concept that we asked a lot about during the Derby debate that we helped to organize, and then the in-house debate we did with the Ansonia candidates. Do you think school district regionalization, Jim, will be something that comes up for discussion again? I know it was under the previous superintendent. It had been talked about for a couple of years, and then it kind of went away because essentially parents spoke out against it, and there was no real support for it from what I saw. And then the district has rebounded under Dr. Conway and his ability to get grants, and then the state support in terms of the Alliance District and everything you just mentioned. It seems that the school district was suddenly on better footing than it had been in, say, 2009, 2010. But as I blab on, regionalization, do you think there'll be any real talk? Could we see a combined school district at some point?
Personally, I do think that there's 169 towns in the state of Connecticut, and when you see what's happened to us economically, there has to be some realization of trying to share services. So to me, I think you have to have a dialogue on sharing services, and that's really where the discussion needs to start. What services can we share? Can we regionalize and or share cafeteria services, busing services, special education services? So really for me, that's where the discussion starts. What services can we regionalize? What can we take advantage of having an economy of scales of a larger student population, and start from there?
And then, Rick, you just hit me across the face. Why? You wanted to add something.
Well, I always think it's interesting. Jimmy and I we don't directly discuss education, but I have a very different opinion, and I think Connecticut has to face up to some realities. It's actually more than 169 school districts, right, Jim?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yep.
So we're providing education, which is the second after transportation. I think is the second largest cost center in the state budget, and when you look at how the state subsidizes education, you look at the McCauser decision, which is the court decision by the judge that's being appealed by the state. The state is obligated constitutionally to provide public education. It doesn't say the town should share the cost, but we have this crazy quilt system where we've observed this concept of home rule, where towns have their own boards of ed, they run their own school district. Doesn't matter how efficiently they educate the kids, and this is not about educators, this is not a cut on teachers. It's about how many kids we're educating and at what cost. honestly, I think Connecticut should have like 6 school districts, maybe 8 tops, and 8 superintendents of schools.
Here comes Radical Dunne.
That's right. And let the state provide it. Let the cities, I think the state should stop opposing the McCowshed decision, stop the appeal. They should take on their obligation to fund 100% of educational costs, which would immediately allow the towns to cut their mill rates by about 50%. We want to talk about economic development and business attraction. The state would gain the greatest economy of scale by running education the way it's run in most of the rest of the country, which is on a county basis. So if they were to do that, something like that, state takes over 100% of the cost, funds it through the sales and use tax, the general revenue streams that are available to the state, allows the cities to reduce their mill rates by half. But the cities would have to agree. They'd have to agree to give up their infrastructure, to give that back to the state, to let the state take it over and run it. It may not mean your kids get to go to school at your alma mater. It may not mean that they go to the closest high school, but we don't have that now. We send kids to magnet schools all over the place.
Tell me about it.
Your kids, you live in Derby, your kids go to Bridgeport.
Yeah.
Kurt Miller has a son
New Haven,
that
I
goes to
think.
New Haven from Seymour. I mean, we do this
No
all
bus
over.
transportation for either of those cases.
Well, and that's an issue. I mean, there are some cost issues, but when we get to administrative salaries, we're talking a significant amount of money right off the bat. So if there were such a system in place, and towns could opt out, I think they should be able to opt out. The towns that get only $1 million a year. I know it sounds strange to say only $1 million, but that's a tiny proportion of an education budget generally. Towns that get small proportions, they want to keep their school system, by all means, keep it, but let that town pay 100% of the cost. If Darien wants to keep their school system, go right ahead. Pay 100% of the cost.
Well, it sounds like they'll have like I don't know.
Like
a gated community school system.
Yeah, but we have this system now where we have an ECS formula that's never fully funded because we have a hold harmless that says that affluent communities get some money even if the formula says they should be paying into the state system. They should have a negative payment.
Let me just jump in and ask, and then we'll wrap it up. Jim, do you have anything you wanted to add to Dunne's? Surprised soliloquy.
I love Rick. I love Rick. Rick's a great guy. I'm still sticking my toe in the water. I'm not jumping in as quick as he is yet.
Well, yeah. Let me like try to not break it down, but when Rick was talking about all the financial issues and the ECS, and I just thought about how you're a guy now that's been on the school board for like 2 generations. 7 kids come through the Derby public school system. Rick's a father too. But Jim, on the school board, I'm wondering when you sit there and that man, when that Board of Education budget comes up and there's conflict over how much money to give. I know since we launched in 2009, although it's a much different atmosphere, but it was not just contentious, but you want to do. Everybody wants kids to succeed and the school district to be the best in the state because it helps everybody, but you can't afford the taxes. And I'm wondering, like, Jim, personally, how have you over the years deal with that? Because I would imagine, just sitting as a reporter, as a sort of outside observer, I found it emotionally draining sometimes. You'd come home from this meeting because there's no good guy, bad guy in those like budget discussions when it gets contentious. How have you dealt with that over the years, Jim?
You're right, because you know what? There is nothing tougher than cutting a program that you really feel passionate about, or not being able to provide something that you think is important. So those days certainly are tough. Through the years, you just try to be as economically prudent and careful as you could be, and take the amount of dollars that you had and made the best decisions with it. But again, having said that, I mean, I hear where Rick is going, and in some theory we agree. Again, he's a little jumping in a little bit more, but I do think that the answer does lie in economy of scale savings, combining services, trying to regionalize offerings. So clearly, I do think that moving ahead, we're in a very different economic climate, and we're going to have to start thinking differently.
Okay, with
Absolutely.
that, With that, I want to thank Jim Gildea and Rick Dunne for coming on this podcast. And that's it. Thank you both.
My pleasure. Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, go right ahead.
If I could, I want to plug for all those folks who've ever read the Valley Independent Sentinel, looked through the election day coverage, couldn't wait to open it up in the morning to see what's happening. I think you got to buy your Valley Indy T-shirt. I bought mine today, and I just want to put a plug. $24.99. It's a fine looking T-shirt. I recommend everyone go buy one.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for buying a T-shirt. Rick bought one too, which wasn't it wasn't like a quid pro. You didn't have to buy it to get on this podcast. No. I just want to point that out there.
And we didn't coordinate this.
All right, guys.
And always, it's a pleasure, Mr. Dunne. Take care, everybody.
James, good to talk to you.
You too, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For hundreds of years we've brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs of inbreeding, TV sucking ideas from our head, public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaur, yeah, ride the dinosaur. Our readers are in the opens each day. Online clickbait, a prurient way. It's free information here to stay. Not even hookers give it away. Advertising, metastasizing, newsroom shrinking, constant attrition. We'll ride the dinosaur. We'll ride the dinosaur. Dinosaur. Deadlines, bylines, pictures too. An editorial comment for a buck or two. Fire down the block, the murder next door. And now we wonder what it's all for. Social media coming free to you, funny pages, the mayor's wages, criminal seats, corruption schemes, ink state wretches asking tough questions. We'll ride the dinosaur, yeah, ride the dinosaur. The presses are running all through the night. We're printing the truth with all of our might. We're platform agnostics, got that interweb too. Buy an ad, see what we can do. We still have subscribers, still have our fans. We're here every day, so give us a chance or we'll make an art stand. Just hold us in your hand, and we'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur.